Stay with me. I see a light.
The storm arrived just after sunset. By nightfall, the road surrounding Ashford Manor had vanished beneath thick blankets of snow, and the wind howled so fiercely against the stone walls that even seasoned servants crossed themselves. Whenever a shutter slammed unexpectedly, candles flickered. Horses grew restless in their stables. Across the county, families gathered around fireplaces and prayed that anyone still traveling would find shelter before the worst of the weather arrived. Inside the library of Ashford Manor, Duke Nathaniel Ashford stood beside a tall window, staring into the darkness beyond the glass. His father was missing. That fact alone had turned an ordinary winter evening into a nightmare. 3 days earlier, Lord William Ashford had left the estate to inspect several tenant farms. It was not unusual for him to travel alone despite his age. William had always disliked excessive escorts and believed a nobleman understood his lands best when he walked among ordinary people rather than observing them from the comfort of a carriage. Normally, he would have returned before sunset. Now the storm had arrived, and there was still no sign of him. Nathaniel lowered his gaze toward the courtyard below, where stable hands prepared another search party despite the worsening weather. His jaw tightened. The older he became, the more he resembled his father, but there was one important difference between them. William trusted people easily, Nathaniel did not. Years of managing the estate had taught him that good intentions often led to disappointment. People lied. They exaggerated. They took advantage of kindness whenever possible. Even those closest to him sometimes seemed more interested in the title of Duke than the man who carried it. Yet William never lost faith in people. And now that faith might have gotten him killed. A knock interrupted his thoughts. "Your Grace." The steward entered, snow covering his shoulders. "We've searched the northern road." Nothing. Outside, the storm continued to rage. And somewhere beyond it, his 70-year-old father remained alone. Unlike the Duke, however, she had no time to stand beside windows and worry. She was too busy trying to remain upright. The wind nearly pushed her off the road twice as she made the journey home from Ashford Manor. Her shift had ended long after sunset, and by the time she left the servants' entrance, the snow was already knee-deep in places. Eleanor pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders and kept walking. Life had never been particularly kind to her. At 24, she possessed no fortune, no influential relatives, and no prospects beyond her position as a maid. Her parents had died years earlier, leaving her only a small cottage and enough debt to teach her caution with every coin she earned. Still, she considered herself fortunate. She had work. She had a roof. And she had learned long ago that bitterness never made difficult days easier. A sudden shape beside the road caught her attention. At first, she assumed it was a fallen branch. Then she saw movement. Someone was lying in the snow. Her heart immediately sank. The figure barely appeared human beneath the ice gathering across his coat. Without hesitation, she rushed forward. An elderly man, unconscious, freezing, and completely alone. For a brief moment, common sense urged her to continue toward the village and seek help. Then she looked at the old man's face. By the time help arrived, it would be too late. No one else was coming. If she left him there, he would die. So Eleanor did the only thing she could. She tried to save him. By the end, both of them were exhausted. Eleanor's arms burned from effort. Her boots were soaked. Her cheeks stung from the cold. Yet somehow she managed to drag, support, and half-carry the old man through the storm. When they finally reached the cottage, she almost collapsed herself. The elderly stranger regained consciousness several hours later. The first thing he noticed was warmth. The second was the young woman asleep in a chair beside the fire. Her head rested awkwardly against the wooden backrest. One hand still held a damp cloth she had clearly been using to lower his fever. The old man stared quietly. No one had cared for him like this since his late wife passed away. And this young woman did not even know his name. "You're feeling better." I wasn't aware that was an option. Instead, it became the beginning of an unexpected friendship. The storm trapped William in the cottage for 3 more days. 3 days that changed how he viewed Eleanor entirely. He noticed everything. The way she carefully stretched every meal. The way she repaired old clothing rather than buying new garments. The way she spoke kindly to neighbors despite carrying burdens of her own. But what impressed him most happened on the second day. A widow from the next farm arrived asking for help. Her son had fallen ill. The physician required payment she couldn't afford. Without hesitation, Eleanor opened a small wooden box hidden beneath her bed. Inside lay nearly all the money she had saved over the previous month. William watched in silence as she handed half of it away. After the widow left, he could not hide his surprise. "You needed that money." "So does she." "Then I suppose I'll worry about that later." Most wealthy nobles he knew would have spent an hour discussing charity. This young maid simply practiced it. As they walked through the village after the weather improved, William noticed a woman glaring openly at Eleanor. Hawthorne, the senior housekeeper at Ashford Manor. She stopped directly in front of Eleanor. "I hear you've missed several days of work." Convenient situation. Some people seem to forget their place the moment they're given a little freedom. "I'll return tomorrow." Only after they had gone several yards did he speak. "Because arguing would accomplish nothing. That woman treats you unfairly." "Many people do. It doesn't mean I have to become like them." The young woman who rescued him was unlike anyone he had met in years, not because she was extraordinary. Because she remained kind despite having every reason not to be. And that, he suspected, was far rarer. Nathaniel himself crossed the entrance hall faster than dignity normally allowed. For several moments, father and son simply looked at one another. Then Nathaniel embraced him. A rare gesture. And one that revealed more affection than either man would ever admit aloud. "You nearly gave the entire estate a heart attack." "Then I apologized to the estate." For nearly 2 hours, he spoke about Eleanor Carter, the storm, the cottage, the money she gave away. The insults she endured, the kindness she showed others, the refusal to accept payment. The more he spoke, the quieter Nathaniel became. Eventually, he set down his wine glass. "You're unusually impressed." "I am." Yet tonight, the old man seemed unable to stop talking about a maid. A maid Nathaniel vaguely remembered seeing somewhere among the staff. "Perhaps you should meet her." The matter should have occupied his attention completely. Instead, he found himself thinking about Eleanor Carter. The woman who had saved his father's life. The woman who apparently gave away money she couldn't spare. The woman his father respected enough to spend an entire evening praising. By late afternoon, he finally spotted her. She stood near the servants' courtyard carrying a basket of linens. At that exact moment, Mrs. Hawthorne was scolding her in front of several other maids. Nathaniel couldn't hear every word, but he saw enough. Eleanor lowered her head respectfully while the older woman continued speaking harshly. Then something unexpected happened. One of the younger maids accidentally dropped a stack of folded sheets. Immediately, Eleanor bent down to help her. Not because anyone asked, not because anyone noticed. Simply because she saw someone struggling. Nathaniel watched the small interaction. And for reasons he couldn't explain, he remained standing there long after the moment passed. For the first time, he found himself wondering whether his father might be right. And as Eleanor disappeared through the courtyard doorway, Nathaniel Ashford realized he wanted to know much more about the woman who had saved a stranger during a storm. Over the following weeks, Nathaniel Ashford discovered that curiosity could become a surprisingly persistent thing. At first, he told himself that his interest in Eleanor Carter was entirely reasonable. The woman had saved his father's life. Any decent son would want to know more about someone who had shown such courage and kindness during a dangerous winter storm. Yet the more often he crossed paths with her, the less convincing that explanation became. Eleanor was unlike anyone he had expected. She never lingered near important guests in hopes of being noticed. When members of the household spoke to her kindly, when others treated her poorly, she simply continued with her work. There was a quiet steadiness about her that Nathaniel found increasingly difficult to ignore. One afternoon, he watched her spend nearly half her lunch break helping one of the younger maids repair a torn dress. On another occasion, He saw her carry a heavy basket across the estate for an elderly gardener whose back had begun troubling him again. She never made a show of these things. In fact, she seemed almost embarrassed whenever anyone thanked her. That, more than anything else, intrigued him. Most people wanted credit. Eleanor seemed content simply knowing she had helped. Unfortunately, not everyone viewed her kindness with admiration. Mrs. Hawthorne had noticed the growing attention Eleanor was receiving, and she disliked it intensely. The senior housekeeper had spent years building her authority within the manor. She valued hierarchy above nearly everything else and considered it dangerous whenever someone of lower rank became too popular. In her eyes, Eleanor's growing reputation threatened the order she worked so hard to maintain. One morning, Nathaniel entered the servants' wing unexpectedly and found Mrs. Hawthorne scolding Eleanor in front of several staff members. "You seem to have forgotten your responsibilities," the older woman snapped. Eleanor remained calm. "I completed every task assigned to me." For a brief moment, he considered intervening. Then he stopped himself. Not because Eleanor deserved the treatment, but because he wanted to understand how she handled adversity. The answer came immediately. Eleanor did not argue, did not cry, did not attempt to embarrass Mrs. Hawthorne in return. Instead, she simply said. The response left the housekeeper looking strangely dissatisfied. Nathaniel found himself smiling despite the situation. Eleanor possessed a strength that did not require raised voices. And somehow that strength seemed more powerful than anger. Officially, it was to thank her for saving his life. Unofficially, he enjoyed her company. For years, most conversations within noble circles had begun sounding exactly alike. The same concerns, the same gossip, the same endless discussions about status, inheritance, and social expectations. Eleanor rarely discussed any of those things. Instead, she spoke about books, village life, children she had helped teach to read, and amusing stories from the estate. Her presence brought a warmth that William had not realized he missed. Nathaniel often joined these conversations. At first, their interactions remained formal, then comfortable, then something else. One rainy afternoon, the three of them sat near the library fireplace discussing travel. William had fallen asleep halfway through the conversation, leaving Nathaniel and Eleanor alone. Neither noticed immediately. They were too busy arguing. "I still think you're wrong," Eleanor said. Nathaniel raised an eyebrow. "About what?" He leaned back in his chair. "That narrows things down considerably. You always expect the worst from everyone. And you expect the best. Someone has to." Nathaniel thought about it long after the conversation ended. Because perhaps she was right. Somewhere along the way, he had become so focused on protecting himself from disappointment that he had stopped expecting goodness altogether. Eleanor still believed it existed. And somehow, despite everything she had endured, she had not been proven wrong. Nathaniel's mother had observed the situation quietly for several weeks before finally deciding she had seen enough. One evening, she requested a private conversation with her son. Nathaniel immediately knew where the discussion was heading. "You spend a great deal of time with Miss Carter. I suspected this was coming. I am not questioning her character. She may very well be an excellent young woman. Even so, there are realities that cannot be ignored. The same arguments noble families had repeated for centuries, Mother. But I am not discussing marriage." The Dowager Duchess watched him carefully. That single response told her far more than she wanted to know. Because for the first time, Nathaniel had not dismissed the possibility. And that frightened her. Everything changed during the spring ball. It was the largest social event Ashford Manor hosted each year. Nobles arrived from neighboring counties, musicians filled the ballroom with music. And every corner of the estate buzzed with activity. Eleanor had no intention of attending. As a servant, she expected to spend the evening working. William Ashford had other ideas. Before she could protest, he arranged for her to join the event as an honored guest. The decision caused considerable discomfort among certain members of society. Mrs. Hawthorne nearly fainted. The Dowager Duchess looked less than pleased, but William ignored both reactions completely. That evening, Eleanor entered the ballroom wearing a simple pale blue gown borrowed from one of the seamstresses. Compared to the elaborate jewels surrounding her, she looked almost modest. Yet Nathaniel found himself unable to look anywhere else. The realization unsettled him. Because this was no longer curiosity, nor admiration, nor gratitude. It was something deeper. Something far more dangerous. He was falling in love. A valuable sapphire bracelet belonging to Lady Pembroke suddenly disappeared. Within minutes, whispers spread throughout the ballroom. Servants searched the rooms. Guests exchanged suspicious glances. Then someone made a suggestion. A terrible suggestion. The bracelet had last been seen near the servants' corridor. And one servant apparently had been observed nearby, Eleanor Carter. Nathaniel immediately felt a cold knot form in his stomach. The accusation was absurd. Yet reason rarely matters when wealthy people are frightened. Mrs. Hawthorne was the first to speak. I always warned that familiarity creates problems. Because she understood exactly what was happening. Someone needed a convenient suspect. And she was the easiest target. The room grew increasingly uncomfortable. Several guests already seemed convinced of her guilt. The Dowager Duchess remained silent. Nathaniel was preparing to step forward. Then another voice interrupted. A familiar voice. A powerful one. If any of you intend to accuse Miss Carter of theft. Lord William Ashford had entered the ballroom. His expression was colder than anyone had seen in years. Then you should first explain why the woman who saved my life would suddenly decide to steal a bracelet. I owe this young woman my life. And if any of you believe her capable of such behavior, then I suggest you know very little about character. At that exact moment a flustered servant rushed into the ballroom. The missing bracelet had been found, it had never been stolen. Lady Pembroke had accidentally left it inside a dressing. A wave of embarrassment spread across the hall. Several guests looked away. Mrs. Hawthorne turned pale. Nathaniel looked toward Eleanor. For a brief moment their eyes met across the crowded ballroom. And for the first time he realized something important. The woman standing before him deserved far better than the way this world treated her. More importantly, he wanted to be the man who gave her that better future. The days following the spring ball should have been some of the happiest Eleanor Carter had experienced in years. Instead they became some of the most difficult. Although the accusation had been proven false, the memory of it lingered. People greeted her more politely now. Servants who once overlooked her suddenly seemed eager to speak with her. Guests who had doubted her innocence smiled whenever they crossed paths, yet Eleanor knew the truth. The respect she received now had little to do with her. It came from Lord William Ashford, from his influence, from his public defense. And while she was grateful, she found something deeply unsettling about how quickly people's opinions had changed. Nathaniel noticed the change in her almost immediately. She smiled less, spoke less. And whenever he attempted conversation, there was a sadness in her eyes that had not been there before. One afternoon, he found her alone in the rose garden behind the manor. The spring flowers had finally begun to bloom. Their bright colors should have made the scene cheerful. Instead, Eleanor looked lost in thought. Nathaniel sat beside her on a stone bench. For a while, neither spoke. Then Eleanor broke the silence. Do you ever wonder how many people truly mean what they say? What brought that on? The ball. A week ago, most of those people believed I was a thief. They were wrong. Not because they suddenly trusted me. For years, he had accepted society exactly as it was. Now, through Eleanor's eyes, he was beginning to see how unfair it could be. And the more he saw, the more he disliked it. Unlike her husband and son, she had spent her entire life navigating the strict expectations of noble society. She understood how quickly rumors spread, how vicious people could become. How a single decision could affect generations of a family. And despite everything Eleanor had done, she remained convinced that her son deserved someone from his own world. One evening, she requested a private meeting with Eleanor. The invitation alone made Eleanor nervous. The Dowager Duchess rarely spoke with servants unless absolutely necessary. The conversation began politely. Tea was served. Pleasantries were exchanged. Then the older woman finally addressed the reason for the meeting. You care for my husband. Very much. For a moment, she looked tired rather than stern. Yet something in Eleanor's chest tightened immediately. Because she knew what was coming. The Duchess continued. My concern is not your character. You have become important to this family. Then came the sentence Eleanor would remember for years. That is precisely why I believe it would be best if you left Ashford Manor. For several seconds, Eleanor could not speak. The Duchess pressed on. You deserve a peaceful life. The Duchess was too dignified to insult her directly. Too intelligent to make threats. But the message remained the same, you do not belong here. When Eleanor finally left the room, she walked through the corridors of Ashford Manor. Feeling strangely calm. Not because she was unhurt. Because part of her had always expected this moment. 3 days later, Eleanor handed in her resignation. The announcement shocked nearly everyone. William was furious. Nathaniel was devastated. The Dowager Duchess said nothing. Officially, Eleanor claimed she wanted to spend more time in the village. No one believed her. Especially Nathaniel. He confronted her the very evening he learned the news. They met near the same rose garden where they had shared so many conversations. You are leaving because of my mother. You should have told me. For a long moment, they stood facing one another. The spring breeze moved gently through the garden. Finally, Nathaniel spoke, Eleanor. And for the first time, he allowed himself to say the truth. I don't want you to leave. I have tried convincing myself that this is gratitude. But it isn't. Because she already knew what he was about to say. And that terrified her. Nathaniel. For a brief moment, Eleanor closed her eyes. Because hearing those words was both the happiest and saddest moment of her life. When she opened them again, tears glistened there. I love you too. Then her next sentence shattered him. But love isn't always enough. Nathaniel watched her carriage disappear down the road. And for the first time since becoming Duke, he felt completely powerless. Then unexpectedly, trouble struck the nearby villages. A fever spread through the region. Not deadly in most, but dangerous enough to overwhelm local physicians. Many wealthier families retreated behind their gates. Others avoided the villages entirely. Eleanor did the opposite. Day after day, she cared for the sick. Delivered food. Organized medicine. Comforted frightened families. She worked until exhaustion became normal. Eventually, news of her efforts reached Ashford Manor. William was proud. Nathaniel was not surprised. The Dowager Duchess, however, found herself curious. And curiosity eventually led her to the village. What she witnessed there changed everything. There were no reporters. No noble guests. No audience. No reward. Yet Eleanor spent hours caring for people who could offer her nothing in return. At one point, the Duchess watched her sit beside a frightened orphan child for nearly an hour. Simply holding the little girl's hand until she finally fell asleep. The sight struck something deep inside her. Because in that moment, she realized an uncomfortable truth. She had spent months judging Eleanor by her birth. While Eleanor had spent those same months serving people without caring who they were. For the first time, the Duchess felt ashamed. When Eleanor opened the door, genuine surprise crossed her face. The Dowager Duchess looked at her quietly. Then said the one thing Eleanor never expected to hear. I was wrong. I believed I was protecting my family. But I failed to see that you had already become part of it. I hope you can forgive me. And this time, the smile reached her eyes. Hundreds of villagers gathered in the town square. Children laughed, musicians played, families celebrated. No one expected what happened next. Nathaniel Ashford stepped onto the platform at the center of the festival. Then, before the entire county, he walked directly toward Eleanor. The crowd fell silent. Even Eleanor looked confused. Until Nathaniel dropped to one knee. A collective gasp swept through the square. His eyes never left hers. My father owes you his life. You taught me to believe in people again. And I would like to spend the rest of my life proving that I deserve your love. And when Eleanor looked toward the Dowager Duchess, she saw tears shining in the older woman's eyes. Woman's eyes as well. The Duchess stepped forward, then embraced her. Not as a servant. Not as an outsider. Not as a girl beneath their station, but as family. My daughter. Yet they meant more than any title Eleanor would ever receive. And as the bells of Ashford rang across the valley that summer afternoon, everyone present understood. They were witnessing something far more important than a noble engagement. They were witnessing kindness rewarded at last.